Here's how to store SOQL query results in a list. Let's start with a list variable, myList. The list should be a list of any specific S object, but I'll leave that S object placeholder here for now. Next, we have an equal sign to set our variable. And we end with our SOQL query. Notice that this query is surrounded by brackets. This tells Apex to expect a SOQL query. Also, very important, notice that the SOQL query is on the same S object as our list. Finally, as with any other line of code, we need to end with a semicolon. That's our template. Here are a few examples. In this example, we store all our leads in a lead list variable. Notice that the list is of type lead and the SOQL query is on leads. Since we're only querying the ID field of our leads, other lead fields such as title would not be available. In this example, we store all our accounts in an account list. This time we're querying both the ID and name fields of all accounts. All other fields would not be stored in our ACC lists memory and thus would not be available. And in this example, we have a full-fledged SOQL query storing a bunch of cases into our case list variable. This query includes the owner.username field. So even though that's not a base case field, it will be available to use from our case list variable. Also notice in this example that the results are ordered by status, then by created date. The reason SOQL queries are stored in lists and not sets is because SOQL queries can be ordered, and only lists will preserve that kind of information. Pretty simple so far, right? You can use your imagination to come up with any crazy SOQL query, and it'll be fully compatible in Apex. The syntax is pretty easy. The hard part always is putting it into practice. So let me give you an example of SOQL in Apex. Let's say we wanted any changes to an account's address to waterfall down and update the addresses of all its contacts. We could write a trigger like this. The trigger would exist on the account object and run anytime an account is updated. We're specifically looking for changes on the account object, so the trigger exists here instead of on the contact object. Next, we'd have our customary loop across trigger.new, setting our temporary account variable to ACC. Then we have our SOQL query. This query would get all of our contacts and store it in a list we're calling contacts. Once we have our list of contacts, we loop through this list and set all our contact address fields to the address fields of our account. You might notice that our SOQL query only included the contact ID and excluded the contact address information such as mailing street and mailing city. If we needed to know the values stored in those fields, we would have needed to include them in our SOQL query too. But we're not curious about what these values are. No matter what, we're overriding them to our account address values. Also notice that we're accessing the billing address fields on our account ACC. ACC is part of trigger.new, and these billing address fields are base fields on the account object, so we didn't need SOQL to access them. Finally, we conclude with our DML statement to make sure our changes save. Without SOQL, this kind of trigger would have been impossible to attempt. We just wouldn't have been able to access existing contacts from an account trigger. Disclaimer: if you showed this trigger to an advanced developer, they would tell you not to have a SOQL query inside a loop for long-term scalability reasons. I promise to soon teach you the technique around this called bulkification, but right now it's more important that you learn how to combine SOQL with Apex. Then afterwards, you can learn how to scale it. You gotta walk before you run.